Hi. This last module is a little bit of a hodgepodge of stuff. I mean, one thing is it's going to talk a little bit about sort of modern religions. You can kind of touch upon different things. Cults, perhaps other religions that have developed within the last 100, 200 years. And there's a lot of different things that, you can look at. I mean, we can look at Christianity as a large part, but then there are other, more modern versions of Christianity, like Mormonism. But I mean, you also have what oftentimes are considered cults, like, something like, I don't know, Mooneyism, and, these things that are sort of at the, I wouldn't say, I want to avoid saying at the fringes, but definitely at the fringes of mainline religious belief within the Western or American society. Things like Scientology, and other things, and some of these that are just very different from others, like even like things like Seventh-day Adventists that are quite different from a lot of Christianity. And so this is really kind of a chance to explore and look at some of those. And I mean, a lot of these aren't necessarily cults or anything particularly negative. I would say they're just sort of different instantiations, and so some of you may be of some of those faiths. And so, it's one thing kind of to keep in mind that, at least initially, those are some of the things we're going to look at. And so I want to look at those. And then just as another side, and it is somewhat of a religious belief. I mean, a lot of you out there probably would say, I'm not religious, or I'm atheist, or I didn't grow up in a religious tradition. And so, one of the things that we can say is there's also atheism, perhaps as a religious movement. So I have a Christopher Hitchens video. Christopher Hitchens died a few years ago of cancer. Was a really great speaker, very interesting. I mean, he was the kind of guy that would just get under your skin and annoy you if you didn't agree with him. And if you liked him, you found him pretty funny. And he was funny. I mean, even when I disagreed with him, I sometimes found him funny. But really a great guy. I mean, brilliant. I mean, very smart guy. Was a journalist as well as a writer on religion and other things. And just a very interesting guy. But he kind of took atheism and was a very dogmatic proponent of the faith of no faith, I suppose. And in that regard, it is in some ways, atheism can be seen as a religion. I mean, it can be seen as providing a moral compass and providing social aspects and other aspects that, in some ways, atheism is religious in that regard. I also have some links to, like, for example, the Ethical Society of St. Louis. They have an actual building in St. Louis. It's like a church that they meet on Sundays, and they have what are kind of like symposiums. They'll listen to music, and they'll have somebody come in and talk about some issue or some spiritual thing, and they'll, not necessarily because they don't believe in God, but they'll just have a good roundabout and talk and, really, commune about secular humanism. They have a beautiful building there, and so I want you to go ahead and you can poke around that. My wife is from the St. Louis area. It's where she grew up, and lived there from age 9 until she married or met me and moved to Central Illinois. But she, I one time said, "Oh, you only live a couple of miles from this Ethical Society," and so we drove by, and it's a beautiful building that's kind of down there. And she's like, she did not care much for it, not because of their beliefs, but because there was a police officer sitting there in their parking lot one day and gave her a ticket, and she drove by. And so, that's just sort of a side note of why she doesn't like the Ethical Society of St. Louis, but I personally do. But I just remember when we were dating, she's like, "I don't want to go here, I got a ticket here." And I was like, okay. Anyway, so Anyway, so but that's an interesting site, it's an interesting group, and something to take a look at. And so I think that fits within this whole, modern religions, modern takes, and different societies, as well as just looking at atheism. And so we're going to close out with that, and that will be our closing point. If I had time, I would talk a little bit about differences in worldviews, and you know what, I'll talk about it right now. I got a few minutes in this video. The one thing that we never really did talk about was the difference between what we call, there's three different things. There's what we call inclusivism, there's what we call exclusivism, and there's what we call pluralism. Pluralism is basically the belief that the truth is plural, that there is no one true religion, that all the religions are true, all the religions are a way to see God. And that's oftentimes the way the Eastern religions would probably manifest themselves. Exclusivism is perhaps what most people associate with Christianity and Islam, and those are sort of the religions that say we're right and everybody else is wrong, and essentially they're exclusive. They have an exclusive right to the truth. They have an exclusive, not right, but they have an exclusive hold on the truth that, you believe them or you don't. And, I told a joke in the Christianity chapter. I'll tell the joke. I'm actually giving these lectures back to back. You might notice I'm wearing the same clothes. But sometimes, my my appearance is sometimes I've had a beard, and that was really just me not shaving. I've had colds. I have a little bit of one right now. But, the same clothes, that's one thing to tell. But I'll tell a little joke. And it's just this joke that, this guy, I don't know, Pope Francis dies, or Pope John Paul II dies, okay? And he goes to heaven, and he gets there, and St. Peter meets him at the gate, and he says, "Great to see us, Pope, and why don't we look around?" And, he's walking around, he goes into one great room and another huge room, and shows him the streets of gold and all this, and he finally is going down this back hallway, and he says, "Well, we got to be really quiet when we go down this hallway, and as we go past that door down there." And he goes, "Okay." And so they walk real quietly, and they get by it, and they get to the other side, and Pope John Paul says, "Well, why do we have to be quiet?" And he said, "Oh, the Baptists are in there, and they think they're the only ones here." Now, I'll pause for the laughter. Anyway, the idea there is that, there are a lot of religions that think they're right and everybody else is wrong, and they're exclusively right. And you can tell that joke. The Baptist dies and he goes to heaven. The Catholics think they're the only ones. That is not a Baptist joke. I just happen to tell it that way. You could do the Methodists, you could do the Presbyterians, although the Presbyterians probably wouldn't care. Probably don't think they're exclusive, have an exclusive hold on the truth. But, that you could do that with a lot of different religions. So that's exclusivism. And the final one is inclusivism. And inclusivism is sort of the belief that there is, that they have an exclusive hold on the truth, but they're inclusive in their perspective on it. And as an example of this, I'm just going to see if I can find it around here real quick. I don't see it. Well, anyway, it doesn't really matter because I'm not going to read it to you, but I would at least show it to you. I had a copy of, just from a few weeks ago, from probably sometime in February of 2014, a copy of the Catholic Times written. It's a newspaper that's sent out to Catholics in the Springfield Diocese. And they do this in all the dioceses of the Catholic Church. The bishop has it. And the bishop, in place of this column that always runs in there, had a story about, in an answer about, finding truth in other religions. And this woman was worried about her child leaving the Catholic Church and was marrying a Protestant. And this priest who writes this advice column said, God can provide intercession on the part, through other faiths, and so you shouldn't really worry about it. And the bishop apparently was very upset. Bishop Procky, the bishop of Springfield, was very upset about that. And so he actually, I believe he's pulled the column. I don't believe it's running anymore. But maybe it will again. But he pulled it and he wrote a column basically questioning the judgment of this priest who writes this column, saying, look, we believe that through the Catholic faith that other religions can find God, but the Catholic faith is the only way to God. And so essentially he's saying that, you know, it's somewhat of it's an inclusivist view. It's the idea that we're right, but basically God is big enough that he's not going to stop the fact that you're not Catholic from keeping you from eventual communion with him. And so the idea there is that while we're right as Catholics, or while we're right as Baptists, that God would perhaps, if just because you weren't Catholic or you weren't Baptist in this life, doesn't mean God wouldn't perform grace and allow you to to go to heaven. Now, what Bishop Paprocki in that essay or that column wrote back, he said, from a pragmatic perspective, there's no way to control your child, and you nagging about the fact they're going to a Protestant church isn't going to do anything, so don't go nagging about it, is basically what he said. But he said you should pray for it, and you should be concerned, and for this priest who writes this column to suggest you shouldn't be is perhaps making a mistake, and that was where he was unhappy. And he also was unhappy that the priest had paraphrased part of the catechism and didn't give the full understanding of it. And so it was an interesting column. I found it fun just because, in all honesty, when I get that Catholic Times, I read it, but that's really one of the few columns I read. I just find it an interesting column to read. Most of the rest of it, I'm not that, just don't read. I just kind of glance through it. And so, sorry, what was it? Oh, okay. So the other thing is that so exclusivism is where this religion's right, but inclusivism says that the religion is right, but that other religions can realize God because the power of that religion goes beyond it. That God and God's infinite love, or God and God's infinite capabilities, would not keep one from communion with God because one was Hindu or because one didn't realize their faith. And so one of the things that I think, at least within a world religions course, we should at least mention is that view that that there are the view of pluralism, which is the idea that all these religions are equal, they're all pointing towards God. There's the idea of exclusivism, which is the idea that we're right and all these other ones are wrong. And the other one is a view of inclusivism, which is the idea that, look, they're not right, but God would not hold that against them. And so God, perhaps if you've turned back to a Catholic view, that through a process of purgation after death, that going through a period of purgatory, that one could eventually reach communion with God. And even Catholics believe that Catholics have to go through purgatory, so don't think that that's not the case. But that they could also, just as Catholics need a period of purgatory, a Hindu could go through a period of purgatory and still reach God, but it's only through Christ and Christ's death and resurrection and the truth that is spoken through the Catholic faith that they are brought into communion with God. That the Catholics are right, but that doesn't mean that the others will be prevented from going to heaven. All right. Well, I hope you enjoy that. This might also be just a good chance for you to explore some of the other religions, and I hope you do that and take a look at some of those. Unfortunately, I don't, some of them I know a little bit more about, some of them I know less, and I won't get into all of them. We could talk about 20, 30 different religions here, and, that would be one thing we could do here, but we won't do that, at least not, in a full scope. So if you have questions, feel free to ask me, but otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed the class, and I hope that you've learned a little bit about religion. Well, I hope you've learned quite a bit about religion, and I wish you luck as you finish up this last module.